Is our reality a quantum hologram? What if the truth about life after death lies waiting to be discovered in the basement of a haunted house? Are we connected to galactic civilizations? I lie awake at night thinking about these things. I never miss an opportunity to ask bigger questions.
Hi, I'm Ron James, and this is another edition of Bigger Questions. I have with me from Ancient Aliens, Mike Bara. Mike is also the author of the book Dark Mission that he co-wrote with Richard Hoagland. And then he's also got Ancient Aliens on the Moon, Ancient Aliens on Mars, and now you've got Ancient Aliens on Mars 2 coming out?
Ancient Aliens on Mars 2 is already out. I've actually got Ancient Aliens and Secret Societies.
You're writing books faster than I can keep
really,
up
and the new one is called Secret Agenda, NASA and the Secret Space Program. So that's, or actually Hidden Agenda, NASA and the Secret Space Program. So that's brand new.
Okay, so you know, the secret space thing has really been, it's been a buzzword that there's this whole thing. Anywhere from, you know, maybe we have a base on the moon all the way to we're working with ET societies and we're part of this big galactic family already, and we've been to Mars and we've been to all these places. So let's talk about that, because it's one of the most talked about subjects in the ET related field now, but it's also the one with the least amount of real solid proof.
Well, you know, that's actually exactly what inspired me to write this book, because you hear all this stuff about the secret space program. There's a lot of people out there talking about it, claiming things that there's not a lot of supporting evidence for. And what I thought to myself is, well, wouldn't it be interesting if somebody, you know, I'm kind of a nuts and bolts guy. I had an engineering background, so I thought, wouldn't it be interesting if I did a book where I really tried to put my finger on what is the chances that there really is some kind of secret space program, that we really have had all of this advanced technology for quite a long time, like at least since the 1950s or 60s. What is the possibilities out there? Is there really any evidence for that? And actually, in going through and researching the book and writing the book, I found out that there was.
So let's talk about some of that. So how far back does the inception of the secret space program go, and when did there become an actual cover-up where NASA is one wing of the space program, and then we have a whole other thing that's going on surreptitiously?
Well, I think that split happened about 1960 when John F. Kennedy took office, and he tried to find out what Majestic 12 or MJ-12 was doing, and they wouldn't let him have any information. There's even a memo that says, you know, Lancer, which is JFK's Secret Service name, is inquiring as to our activities, and this is something we cannot allow. And I think what happened was he got stonewalled, and so he was like, okay, to heck with you guys, I'm going to make my own space program, secret space program, under the guise of a public space program, which was NASA. So I think that split happened in 1960. As of the first part of your question, it goes all the way back to the 1800s, because what you find is that in the 1800s, there was this organization in Prussia that was called NIMZA, N-Y-M-Z-A, or N-J-M-Z-A. Nobody really knows exactly what it stood for, but it has something to do with airships and aerial reconnaissance office and that kind of thing. And it was basically funded by a bunch of Prussian, later to be German industrialists who were fascinated by the ancient texts, the Vedas and the stories of the Vimanas, and they begin to piece together through they looked at these as if they were physicists rather than religious texts. And they begin to recognize that there was a possibility of building anti-gravity machines, flying technology. That's what they felt was embedded in that. So they started a practical program to actually create that. And it seemed to start about 1830, or 1850 rather, when a gentleman named Charles Delschow was sent to the United States. He was Prussian. He appeared to have connections with some of these Prussian royal families, if you were, or these very secret families, these really rich industrialists. And he came to the United States, went through Ellis Island, went to Chicago, went to Houston, Texas, and then he goes to Sonora, California, which is about 140 miles east of Sacramento. And there he formed something called the Sonora Air Club, and there is actual evidence that the Sonora Air Club did exist. Most of the members were Prussian. It's as if they sent a bunch of Prussian engineers out to the American West. Now, you may think about, like, okay, why does that make sense? Why would you do that? Well, Prussia was actually, you know, fairly well populated. It was Europe. There were lots of wars. Borders were changing all the time. And if you think about it, if you were going to do some experimentation, actually trying to build airships at the time, because there were no dirigibles, there were no balloons, there was nothing like that at the time to speak of, that would be the perfect place to build, construct, test these craft and actually, be able to do it without anybody looking at you, because the American West was virtually totally uninhabited at that time. So it seems like...
So this is like the original Area 51.
This is the original Area 51, and that's why Area 51's way out west. That's why most of the secret bases are still out here in the West, because it's still really dramatically underpopulated. So they sent this guy out there. There's evidence in some of the paperwork that there was some kind of breakthrough. One of the members, named Gustav Freyr, claimed that he had developed something called NB gas, which would make craft have an anti-gravity capability. And then at 1860, Delsha goes back to Houston, where he had left his family and his children, and he spends the rest of his life there. But then he begins sketching these incredible visions, these sketches of mechanical airships that are powered, some of them by propellers, but they all seem to be using this NB gas as a propellant. And they're very, very extensive, they're very exotic, and a lot of people say, oh, well, this is just... he was an artist, In fact, he was an engineer, he was a draftsman. And I look at these and I recognize these as what we used to do in the aerospace industry, because, I worked in the aerospace industry for a long time.
Sure.
And we used to have what they call production illustrations, which is where guys that were artists would actually do kind of a perspective view of a part of the aircraft, a wing assembly or something like that, and show every single nut and bolt and how it went together. And that's what he was creating. And what he was doing is he was, I think, showing people from memory actual craft that he had worked on and helped design. And the fascinating thing about this is that a few years later, around the 1896, 1897 period, so we're jumping forward actually 30 years, all of a sudden there is this wave of airship sightings in the western US. And guess where it starts? It starts in Sacramento, California, very, very near Sonora. And then it kind of works its way back through Nebraska and Texas. At the time of the very famous Aurora crash, the Aurora, Texas crash, where there was supposedly a flying saucer hit a windmill.
Hit a windmill.
And, the newspaper accounts say the body was not of this world, and the aircraft was not of this world, and it was all buried there. And it basically follows Delsha's path back towards Russia. It seems to me, and I know this is a really long answer, but it seems to me what's going on is that Nimza sent a team of people out in the middle of nowhere to work on this stuff. They had a breakthrough with this NB gas, and then they began to work on the mechanical structures of how these airships would actually work. And then 20, 30 years later, they had them perfected, and then they flew the technology back to Prussia. Because if you look at it, it's west to east, and then east to west with the airship sightings. Or east to west, and then west to east. It's as if they were taking the technology back home to Prussia. So that's a big key part of it. So it started way back in the 1800s. And then you begin to have, of course, the work of the Nazis in the 1930s. There was the Vril Society came forward with Maria Orsic, where she was working on all of these different technologies that she was supposedly channeling from aliens, writing down all this runic script, as if this runic script stuff had something to do with actually making the craft work. And you look at Delsha's paintings, and he also has this coded information that nobody's broken yet on his technical drawings that are very, very similar to what Maria Orsic was working on 10, 15 years later, channeling. And then gets into the whole Nazi Bell development stuff that happened during World War II.
Now, what's your take on this code and how they were getting it and what it means?
I think that the code is some sort of symbolic or runic alphabet that's channeled from higher level beings. I'm not going to say aliens because I'm not necessarily sure that they are aliens, but definitely getting this information to help them actually make these craft work. Because it seems to me that non-exotic travel, like aircraft travel, which,
sure,
by the way, airplanes, this is going to scare a lot of people, but nobody really knows why airplanes fly. We haven't proven why airplanes fly yet. There's a myth that the air pressure difference of the airfoil lifts the aircraft, but when you do the actual calculations, there's not enough lift to actually lift the aircraft off the ground.
Well, now
So-
you remember the Flying Nun, right?
Right.
Okay, so you remember the thing that they said at the beginning of every episode: lift plus thrust is greater than load plus drag.
Right.
Anything will fly.
Right.
Is that not exactly true?
Well, it is true, but nobody can actually calculate where the lift is coming from. I guess that's maybe how I could redefine it. As we measure it, we don't get that. We know if you build an aircraft with an airfoil of a certain shape and you push it forward fast enough, it will lift off the ground. But exactly where that lift is coming from, we don't know. Now, what I think is that all this runic stuff, this is some sort of mystical aspect to this that they were able to or needed to incorporate into their devices, like the Nazi bell from World War II and stuff,
Sure.
to make them actually
when you
have an
say,
anti-gravity
when you say
effect.
mystical, you mean like something that is beyond physics, or just something that is? How does mystical play into what you're talking
It's a really good question, and really, I think mysticism and physics are the same thing. I mean, it used to be that the
about?
village.
You think mysticism is just an
It's
expanded
an extension.
mastery of physics?
Exactly. It's an extension, and I mean, I think back in the days, up to about the 1850s. Basically, the scientist and the mystic in the town were the same guy. Merlin the magician, he was the guy that
Sure.
was doing all the incantations, and he was also the guy that did the scientific inquiries. It's only been really recently that we separate the Carl Sagans and the Neil deGrasse Tysons from, I don't know, the Deepak Chopras and the guys doing the spiritual stuff.
Sure.
So the Germans felt that this had to be melded in order for all this technology to work. And that's why on, for instance, the Nazi bell, which I think was an anti-gravity reactor, you have these runic symbols because it somehow amplifies or enhances the effect.
So the symbols themselves, being actually part of the craft, have an effect.
Have a power.
Almost like they're channeling some kind of additional power.
Right, have some sort of power. At least that was the belief system that the Germans were operating under. And again, all this stuff was developed. Hans Kammler and his whole operation that I think Dr. Joseph Farrell's written a lot about, it was all, again, in Silesia, which is an area of Prussia. So if you look at the development of all this technology, and it's always Prussia, 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 or what is now, I think, part of Poland and Germany both, but at the time was controlled by Nazi Germany. So you have this confluence of experiments and things happening back there, coming from there. And it would ultimately lead you to the flying saucer concept. There was another German physicist by the name of Schauberger who developed an aircraft called the repulsing. And his concept was that in physics, he used to say that fish did not swim, they were swum. And birds did not fly, they were flown. It was some sort of idea that you could tap into the natural forces that already exist in currents and just ride along them.
That's almost the faster than light travel theory.
Yeah,
that
exactly.
you can literally bend space-time. And
exactly,
yeah,
and
wow.
that's T. Townsend Brown stuff. And anyway, so Schauberger developed this thing he called the repulsing, which was a disc. And the disc-shaped object enabled him to control where the thing went, the vectors. Whereas like the bell, it kind of just wanted to rise up out of its test rig and go anywhere it could, and it had very bad effects on people. And I think what the Germans did is they figured out how to meld the reactor, which was the bell, inside of this disc shape, which is how you get the standard flying saucer disc shape with the cupola in the middle. I think in the middle was the reactor, the bell, and the rest of it was the disc-shaped craft, which was enabled them to control the performance. And that's how they ultimately built the Hahnenbaus, the Nazi, or Hahnenbaus, I forget how you pronounce it.
The Nazi bell.
The Nazi flying saucers that actually supposedly attacked the
Now, did
US.
mercury play a role in the system?
The thing is, the red mercury was something that you hear about, and it's a mystical substance. People don't really know what it is. It's supposed to be this really thick, red, viscous fluid. And what I think is that, actually, if you look at the paperwork, the Germans refer to it as Zerum 525. Other people now call it red mercury, but the description is the same. I think what it is that that's the NB gas that was discovered by the Sonora Air Club in the 1800s. That information makes it back to Nazi Germany. They keep working on this technology for almost 100 years, and then they finally have the breakthrough where that is the fluid mixture that enables the counter-rotating magnetic fields, the massive plates inside the Nazi bell to have this anti-gravity effect. So it all fits together.
A lot of people think that, the super jump in technology occurred basically in the 40s, around the time of the nuke, around the time of the Roswell incident. But what I hear you saying is that technology that is not in the mainstream, that not a lot of people are aware of, that is way ahead of what is normally perceived as current technology, that kind of situation has been going on since we were even able to envision technology.
I am saying exactly that. I think that you stated it better than I ever could. So you have this development of this German technology, German-oriented technology around all this stuff. At the same time, it does appear you've had some flying saucer crashes. I mean, Dr. Bob Wood, who is a brilliant guy, works for MUFON OC, does a lot of their stuff. He was one of the first people that was tasked with actually researching flying saucers by his aerospace company back in the 1940s. And he found documents that show that there have been crashed flying saucers since well before the Roswell incident, that we were well aware of this stuff, that we developed technology like fiber optics out of these crashed spacecraft that we found. So you kind of then get that further development mixing together. So you have the German technology, and you know, it's interesting too because Hermann Oberth, who's sort of the father of the rocketry, German rocketry programs, which von Braun developed, he said flat out in 2 interviews that, you know, we didn't develop this stuff on our own. The people of other worlds have helped us. So he's basically acknowledging that there was some sort of extraterrestrial presence.
Going further, was he acknowledging that there was an interactive presence, or that you know, they just got some stuff out of a crash and they were able to back engineer it?
Well, when now you have to be careful because when you translate from one language to another, the meaning can get lost, right? But he did say we got help from the people of other worlds, and to me, the phrase of it, the phraseology, implied that there was cooperative efforts going on, which of course we've all heard about over the years, but nobody's ever been able to prove, and nobody has yet proven.
So that's a really enlightening set of information, you know, especially all the stuff going back to the guys from Prussia.
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't believe it when I started digging into it, and I'm finding all this stuff that I've never heard anybody talk about.
So let's jump ahead to post-Roswell, post-World War II, and the secret space program. Where was it at that point, in your opinion?
Well, at that point, I think we'd had Operation High Jump, which went to, basically it was a U.S. invasion of Antarctica right after World War II.
What do we find there? You know, this information is pretty sketchy. People that want to go on the internet and look, there's certainly some well-documented incidents when they sent the ships down of just some really strange things going on. But what was it, in your opinion, that was really there? Well,
the rumor is that the Nazis, of course, we know the Nazis went down and did exploration. They created an area called New Schwabenland, which was basically a piece of Antarctica that they claimed for themselves. There are rumors that there were entrances to, you know, the hollow earth, inside the earth, that there's vast caverns and civilizations in there. I don't know if that's true or not, but I do know if you look at the map, and you look at Operation High Jump, basically New Schwabenland was at one tip of Antarctica. We set up a base at the other end, and then we sent all of our ships and planes right there. And the rumor, of course, is that we got our butts kicked by Nazi flying saucers, which were derivative of their own inventions, their own discoveries, and according to Oberth, you know, the technology of other worlds, the technology of these alien beings. And you know, it's a classic double pincer movement. It's a military maneuver, and all we know for a fact is that the weather at that time, it was the height of summer. They claimed that they left after only 6 weeks because the weather was getting bad, and it doesn't make any sense because the weather was actually really quite good, and they left behind tons and tons of equipment. I mean, we did not leave. We retreated from the area. And then afterwards, Admiral Byrd, who actually commanded the expedition, gave an interview where he said, we have to be the most concerned about aircraft with unbelievable speed and capabilities attacking us from the poles. That's the biggest national security threat that we face going forward, which I think it's pretty fascinating that he would say that. And at the same time, you have yet another parallel operation happening. There's an American inventor named T. Townsend Brown who was working on developing anti-gravity technology himself. So he was a guy that basically he found if you took a disc-shaped object, in other words, again, the classic flying saucer shape, right? You take this disc-shaped object and you blast it with very, very high voltage electricity. What you would have is the positive and negative ions would separate, and all the positive charged stuff would go to one end and the negatively charged ions would go to the other end. And when that happened, the object would move in the direction of the positive charge. So basically you got propulsion out of nothing more than electrifying this metallic shell. Now there's very exotic materials involved. You had to constantly kind of recharge the disc because what would happen is everything eventually would balance out and then the effect would stop. But he also found that the more massive the disc shape, the more the effect was amplified. So this was an anti-gravity effect where literally what he believed was happening was that gravity itself, what was happening was that at the back you were getting a gravity field or space-time actually warping up like this, and at the front you created a trough, and then the object would move forward, and it was constantly recreating this. It was, if you read his papers, it literally is the warp drive from Star Trek. It's warping space and gravity both in front of and behind the craft. And you know, I mean, really, when you look at this, all you have to do is upscale the electrical charge, upscale the power, and you're talking about superluminal speeds, like you mentioned earlier. So Brown took his information after the war to the United States Navy, gave them a big presentation about how he wanted to build U.S. flying saucers, and there's illustrations of, you know, flying saucers with the USAF logo on them, and they said, thanks very much. And then everything in the literature at that time just goes completely dark about anti-gravity. So it's like, obviously they were looking at anti-gravity technologies post-war. You had the big events in Washington, D.C. in 1952, which scared the bejesus out of everybody. They may have been alien. They may have been Nazis. Some people think this was the Germans flying their flying saucers up from Antarctica and saying, you better make a deal with us or we're gonna wipe the United States out. Some people think that the Germans then became part of the national security state. So I don't know about that. What I do know, what I was able to find out, is that after the war, the American aerospace industry was fascinated by the concept of anti-gravity. There are newspaper ads where they were looking for scientists and engineers to study anti-gravity research. All of this stuff is in the literature, in the scientific stuff, all the different papers that came out, and then right after T. Townsend Brown gives his presentation, it's cut off.
So that's pretty good evidence. It's almost like all the patents on tunnel boring machines. That these machines were designed, they were patented, and then nothing.
Nothing.
Right. And so, you know, it sounds like the same pattern, that the whole program was taken deep undercover, and that's where it has remained.
Right, and I think Brown's work was probably the breakthrough that they were looking for. And it's interesting, if you look, the thing to me that really is compelling, I think, about
now, did Brown die some mysterious death?
No, he just passed away.
That's usually what happens to those
He could
guys.
not get funding for his experiments. He did tons and tons of experiments, but he could never get really big funding for them. Nobody official.
You know, why do you think that is? We have people that, even today in breakthrough energy, that can't get funding. Tesla was another example. This guy was way more brilliant than Edison, and what he had on the table was way more innovative. But, you know, he died relative pauper. And this seems to happen to people that have these kind of paradigm-shifting inventions or visions. Even if there's validity to their technology, they tend to be shunned, and they do not do well.
Well, remember, if you have one great idea, you're a genius. If you have two great ideas, you're a crackpot. So that's the rule that life goes by. And I think what happens with these people is that they do have the genius idea, they make the breakthrough, they come up with the concept, and then once the military guys understand the concept, the basic concept, which they would never have thought of themselves, they can then go engineer that. So they don't need the inventor anymore, so they drop them or let them die in obscurity or whatever. And I just think that that's the pattern that it follows. It seems to be throughout history that is the case with the great inventors. And I think T. Townsend Brown is somebody who should be mentioned in the same breath with people like Tesla. There's no question in my mind.
So we're past the end of World War II.
Right.
We're into the incident at the Capitol has already happened.
Has happened.
And so the secret space program is starting to actually gain some legs and actually have some results. What does it look like? It
looks like flying saucers. It looks like you're building a fleet of flying saucers that theoretically are capable, with very, very little energy expenditure, of even going to the next star system, even going to Alpha Centauri, and be arriving there in 3, 4, 5 months, depending on how fast you want to go. And there's no question that you could have certainly gone to Mars, gone to the moon, come back numerous times in secret before we ever built the rockets, and nobody would ever know about it. Meantime, von Braun and the other rocketry guys are building their chemical rockets, which of course by comparison are very, very primitive, but they're also something that the American public or the public at large would find acceptable. Because, I mean, to jump from propeller-driven airplanes to maybe jet airplanes and then to flying saucers is a huge, huge leap. So they bring us the next step, which is chemical rockets. And those were, of course, problematic to develop. But what I think happens is, in 1960, Kennedy gets in office, and he's the first president that has excluded from the MJ-12 information, from the information about aliens. And he is, you know, there's a long history of Kennedy having an interest in aliens and UFOs, expressing that as a senator. He was probably not a guy they were very happy with. On the inside, the CIA types, the national security state, as Richard Dolan likes to call it, they're not really happy with him. They don't like him. So either they blocked him out because they just wanted to like not let him have access, or they decide no president needs to really know what we're doing. We're above them.
Let's sidetrack for a second, because I worked with Paul Davids on the film Marilyn Declassified, where, you know, documents pertaining to Marilyn Monroe's being under surveillance, and potentially, you know, things that were linked to the reason for her death, and her death being a murder and not an accident. You know, this stuff has come out, and there are some things in the film that we found that seem to indicate that perhaps Kennedy had talked to Marilyn about things that happened at Roswell, things that were ET related, and that played a factor in why both of them were killed. What's your take on that?
Well, Kennedy appears to have been briefed on Roswell in the 1940s, as I understand it, before he was even maybe a U.S. senator. So he did know about this kind of stuff. I think that's a possibility, but here's what I think got Kennedy killed. He decided to start his own separate space program. When he couldn't get anywhere with MJ-12, that's when he went public and said, we're going to go to the moon and do the other things, not because they're easy, but because they are hot.
That's a pretty good impression.
That's okay.
You got to do your David Childress before the end of the interview, too.
Chowda. Anyway, so he went and did that publicly, and his idea was, because I think everybody knew that there was Anunnaki technology on the moon. I think we all knew that, and the moon was close and it was easy to get to, and so he was like, okay, you know, screw you guys. I'm going to build my own public space program. We're going to go there. We're going to retrieve our own technology, and we're going to reverse engineer it, kind of on the civilian side, I guess you'd say, or the non-intelligence side. And that was all well and good. But then one of the first things he did was, after the space race started, is he started proposing to Khrushchev that we go to the moon together, that the Russians and the United States go to the moon in unison, hand in hand, sing Kumbaya on the moon together, all this stuff. And he railed against the secret societies. Remember that? He made this great speech about secret societies and all this stuff and how horrible it was and how people shouldn't believe in it. And the first two times he proposed it in private, Khrushchev said no. The third time he proposed it was on September 20th, 1963, a little more than 2 months before he was killed, at the UN, very, very publicly. And a lot of people came out against that and said, oh, we don't want to do that. But this time, Khrushchev appears to have accepted it, because his son, Sergei, says that he was taking a walk with his father in early November of 1963, and they were talking about this, and Khrushchev said, we're never going to beat the Americans. They're going to beat it. They're going to beat us to the moon. So either we're going to take this tremendous embarrassment, or if we join with them, we can save face and we can find out what they find out. We can share this, and it might be good for both of our peoples to do this. So Khrushchev had apparently accepted Kennedy's proposal to go to the moon together. And how we know that is because, again, Dr. Bob Wood has unearthed two documents, MJ-12 documents, or National Security Action Memos, which are the last two National Security Action Memos that Kennedy ever wrote. In the first one, he instructs, and this is the one we've all seen, he instructs the director of NASA to open an office within NASA to start exchanging information between our side and their side, a joint space program. So actually, you will open an office, James Webb, you will open this office, you will start exchanging information with the Russians. I want it done by February, he said. And then there's another secret security action memo, which some people argue is a forgery, but it's not, where he says, we also need to make sure that, this is to the CIA director, we also need to make sure that we provide them with information on all of the secret craft that we are developing, so that they are able to tell the difference between our craft and the bona fide UFOs. Now, people think that means Kennedy was going to tell the whole world about aliens and UFOs. That's not what he was going to do. What he was going to do was he was going to go to the moon, he was going to share whatever we found there, which potentially would have been earth-shattering technologies that we could then reverse engineer, and 10 days later, after he wrote these two memos, his head got blown off in Dallas by, well, I mean, we can talk about the conspiracy. I have my own conspiracy theory, which I put in the Hidden Agenda book. It's also in my Secret Societies book. So you know, I think that what happened is that it was acceptable for him to talk about this, but once Khrushchev accepted the offer in private, and then Kennedy began to actually move forward with it, and it's very public that he said, we're going to open this office up.
Right.
That was the last straw, and that's when they blew his head off.
So it was more about the deal to go to the moon.
Mm-hmm. I think so. And, you know, I think Kennedy wanted to tell people these secrets. I think he felt like we were mature enough for them. They were hamstrung quite a bit by the so-called Brookings Report politically. But the plan was to go there, retrieve the technology, and eventually tell people what it was that we had found there. And unfortunately, when he was killed, Lyndon Johnson took over, 33rd degree Scottish Rite Freemason. The whole thing became sort of co-opted by the secret societies, and the Apollo program just became this very dark, secret, unpleasant kind of thing, which is not what it was supposed to be.
You know, it's interesting, and you know, I don't want to get off the track of the secret space program, but I guess this actually has something to do with it. You know, I've sat down and talked to these astronauts. Mm-hmm. You know, I was good friends with Edgar Mitchell. I had private conversations with him about, you know, what he saw on the moon, what happened to him on the way back. And none of these guys is coming off, oh yeah, we saw alien technology and we're guarding these secrets. You know, Story Musgrave, he didn't go to the moon, but he's in. And these guys that went there are not, you would expect there to be, you know, radical deathbed confessions, or even from Edgar, there was never, I have firsthand experience, even in his last days. So if there's this cover up about what we found on the moon, why is it so hard to get to the people that were actually there and get them to even allude to it? Well,
when you say Ed Mitchell, you mean born in Roswell, New Mexico, 33rd degree Scottish Rite Freemason Ed Mitchell, right? That's who you're talking about? Ed Mitchell has gone out of his way to get people to believe in the stuff that we'll never prove, which is that these lights in the sky are alien spacecraft. He's totally trashed the idea that they landed in an area surrounded by these giant glass, semi-transparent ruins, and that there was alien technology. In other words, the stuff that can be proved, he discouraged people from believing in. Stuff that will never prove, he encouraged people to believe in. So
you're saying these guys are hardcore insiders all the way to the end?
Yes, to a certain extent, although there have been some breaks in that. Now, you know, Neil Armstrong on the 25th anniversary of Apollo talked about truth's protective layers and how if you peeled them back, there was unimaginable wonders out there to be discovered. Very sort of symbolic language, but what the hell's he talking about? I thought the moon was nothing but a bunch of rocks, and he's talking about peeling back the layers of truth and basically saying that what you have seen is not the truth. You have John Glenn, who went in 2003. He appeared on a TV show, sitcom called Frasier, which was the #1 show in the country at the time, right? Okay, it's a sitcom. You can think it's a big joke, but the scene that happened is that Frasier and his assistant Roz get off and they go in an argument and they leave John Glenn in the studio by himself with the microphone. So what does he do? He takes the microphone and he starts talking, and he said, you know, people always ask us if we saw stuff out there. And we have to tell them no, but the truth is we did see stuff out there. And it was terrifying. And NASA wouldn't let us talk about it because they were afraid of the people going crazy, the War of the Worlds type stuff. But we do see these things now, mostly just in our nightmares, but we do see them. And the whole thing about the sequence is, it's completely awkward, it's completely out of context with the episode, it's not funny, and he's looking into the camera to the people that are watching, not anywhere else in the show. So this is John Glenn making his statement, and we found out later that Glenn asked to be on Frasier, and so this is how these guys all had security oaths.
So this is how they get around their controlled drip of information.
It's how they get around their security oaths, and a lot of these guys finally are talking and are starting to say things. Alan Shepard put several photographs in his biography, his book, that are fakes, and I think the implication was, I'm going to make these fake, and I'm going to make them so obviously fake that people will know that there's something fake about what's going on here. So there's that, and I think also a lot of the astronauts don't really remember. I've been in a cocktail party with my co-author of Dark Mission, Richard Hoagland. We were talking to a lady who actually was with the astronauts, did some of the technical debriefing for the Apollo program. Mm-hmm. And we were talking and asking her questions, and we said, you know, oh God, the technical details are great. And she goes, oh yeah, we did a lot of things to help them remember. And we were like, what? And they go, well, we hypnotized them. You mean all the astronauts that came back from the moon were all hypnotized when they came back before their briefing? She goes, yeah. And I go, well, maybe that would explain why they can kind of lay out chapter and verse what they did off their checklists of tasks, but when you ask them
anything off the road,
how did it feel to be on, when Buzz Aldrin was asked on national television in 1970, how did it feel to be on the moon? He had a panic attack. He ran off the set, live interview on NBC, and ran out and threw up. That's MK Ultra conditioning.
You know, it's very interesting because when I interviewed Edgar, I did a really formal interview with him in Washington, D.C., and that was what I was trying to get to with our conversation is, you know, I don't want to hear the nuts and bolts about what happened, Edgar.
Right.
I want to know how did it feel?
Right.
You know, and he could not give me an answer to that.
None of them
and
can.
It was the one thing about that interview that just made me go, well, wait a minute, man, there's something not right about this.
And none of them can.
And
so
I have that interview. I haven't published it yet.
I'd love to see it sometime.
Yeah, I'd be happy to share it with you.
Although obviously somebody who's an expert in body language and that kind of thing would be, you know, be able to tell you more than I could. I'm not an expert in that stuff,
Sure.
but I can kind of tell when somebody's BSing and when they're telling the truth, I hope. But the best thing about that cocktail party is then, you know, we're kind of like, maybe this explains why Buzz had this really weird reaction and why they can't remember anything except their checklist of tasks that they performed. And she goes, yeah. And then she goes, you know, come to think of it, and I swear to God, I was standing right there, she goes, come to think of it, I can't remember anything about those sessions either. So they hypnotized the lady who hypnotized the people, the astronauts that were being interviewed. So
now, do you think
I
we're talking about
it.
just hypnosis, or do you think they actually have some kind of memory erasing technology?
Yeah, do they have the Men in Black thing?
Yeah.
It's possible they do, but it doesn't seem like it's that thorough. I mean, another good example of this is Alan Bean, who was the fourth man to set foot on the moon on Apollo 12. And Apollo 12 is interesting because I talk about it in Hidden Agenda, the NASA and the Secret Space Program.
Sure.
I talk about Apollo 12 because one of the things I've argued for years is that on the moon there are these giant ruined scaffolding, this glass structure, which actually were built over the bases to provide a meteor protection. And really, to get into the technical details, glass is perfect for the moon because glass with no moisture in it is actually about as strong as steel. So it's like you're building a steel superstructure over your moon base with, with glass, material that's as light and easy to manipulate as glass. So that makes a lot of sense. But Apollo 11 was a purely symbolic mission. I mean, it landed. I talk about this in the other books. Buzz Aldrin performed a Masonic ceremony in the lunar module before they ever went out and did their moonwalk. We had the terrible, crappy black and white TV camera. I mean, I remember asking my dad at the time, I'm like, Dad, you know, we have a color TV. Why is this in black and white and so terrible looking? And he's like, well, you know, I don't really know, son. And my dad was an engineer at Boeing. He said, I don't really know. I don't know why it's not a better picture. I go, well, would the distance be a problem? He said, no, it's just the signal transmission to, what we would now call bandwidth,
right,
is what it is. And it didn't make any sense. And it turns out they had a terrific color camera, but they ordered them to leave it on board the command module that was still orbiting on Apollo 11 because they didn't know what we might be able to see over the horizon. Now on Apollo 12, they took that camera with them to the surface. They landed, and there's some great research online, which I put in the book, where a guy has said that it appears that the astronauts did what's called a stand-up EVA after they landed on Apollo 12, which is completely secret. And again, there's a bunch of details in the book I talk about it. Basically, here's what it consists of. When they landed, they evacuated all the atmosphere out of the lunar module. There's a 19-minute gap where there's no communication at all. They opened the top hatch. You stand on top of the ascent stage engine casing, and the astronauts can look out and see the entire panorama of what's around them, because Apollo 12 was landed right in the middle of all this stuff. Apollo 11 was symbolic. Let's consecrate the moon as a Masonic temple. Apollo 12, we're going to land right in the middle of this stuff, and we're going to go look for alien technology. Now, this was done on Apollo 15. It was fully acknowledged. There's photographs of it. And you get up and you can see the entire panorama of the landing site. And the purpose of them doing this, clearly to me, was what are we going to be able to see off in the distance? Because again, they had landed in the middle of this scaffolding kind of structural stuff. And I think what happened is they got up there and they looked around and they said, oh my holy crap, we can't show people at home this because somebody's going to notice that's the giant skyscraper over there made out of glass. They're going to notice this stuff. And so we can't really show them that. We have to find out ways to do filters on the camera or whatever. So they have this period of time, and again, there's a whole case that can clearly be made that they did this secret stand-up EVA. They close the hatch, then they go back, they start talking to Houston again, they go back through their normal routine. They get on their spacesuits, they go out, and they do their official moonwalk. But here's what happened is, Alan Bean, whose job it was, and remember at first the camera was on a little panel that just like, as the guy descended the ladder, he'd reach over and pull down and it would flop down, and you could just see this very narrow shot of the landing gear and the ladder and the astronaut and very little in the background. They flop it down. Alan Bean's task is to go over and get the camera, take it off the platform, and then put it on the tripod so it can then pan around and watch everything the astronauts are doing. Instead, what he does is he walks down the stairs, he takes the camera, he pulls it off, and he does the one thing he was specifically trained not to do. He points the camera right at the sun and burns out the optics, and we have virtually no video at all of what the Apollo 12 astronauts did on the moon or the area around them.
Now we're here at the present time, and a lot of stories are coming out about the extent of the secret space program.
Right.
It's really hard to separate the BS from what's true.
Right.
So, you know, we have people like Corey Goode, who's, oh, well, yeah, I was at Mars. I'm part of this galactic thing. And other people that seem to be saying the same story, that the secret space program is really a vast entity, and that we're engaged with extraterrestrials, and that there's just this whole, as Richard Dolan says, breakaway civilization that's happening right under our noses. But then there's other people that say, well, you know, it's not like that, but there is a lot of classified technology involved in the secret space program, and we've certainly been places that we're not telling. So there's a huge chasm of information just being dropped. It goes from very basic to extremely esoteric and really unbelievable. And so where do you fall in the spectrum?
Well, I do talk about Corey Goode and Andrew Basiago in the book, and you know, the point I make is that these are really interesting stories. They may have some kernel of truth in them, but neither one of the guys has really any proof of what they're saying. So I like to stick with the proof. To me, I'm a nuts and bolts guy. So what is it that we can actually prove? And you know, I mean, I look at John Leonard Walson's photographs of what look like space platforms in orbit, and there are people that argue that those are fake or they're hoaxes, but they look to me like craft in orbit, and it looks consistent with what, given the motion and the atmospheric, diffusion, it looks to me like that's what we would expect to see. So I think there are probably space platforms up there that house these things. There's development of what's called an ARV, or the Alien Reproduction Vehicle, that Mark McClandis talked about, and I cover that in the book, where it looks like we've developed our own flying saucer technology of some kind. And you combine that with the STS-48 and the STS-80 space shuttle videos, which appear to show powered craft. This is the famous one where the flying saucer pops up over the horizon and goes like this, and then a bright flash, and it shoots away that way, and you see two streaks shooting at it. You know, there's that one. There's another one where a flying saucer comes into the field of view, and it kind of station keeps with the shuttle for a while, and then it goes back the way it came. And I mean, I showed these at Orange County, a MUFON meeting in Orange County, and Blaine Hammond is a NASA astronaut, space shuttle pilot, and he completely concurred with my assessment that, yeah, these are powered vehicles in low Earth orbit, and they appear to have capabilities far beyond our own acknowledged capabilities. But again, this is interesting because you look at the development of transportation technology, right? And from the time of the Romans forward, basically the fastest thing on Earth was the horse and buggy, which could probably do, what, 25, 35 miles an hour at the most. But you have the horse and buggy, followed by then, I guess the next thing would be the steam train, the automobile, the propeller airplane, the jet airplane, and the rocket. Chemical rocket. And if you look at the trend curve, it goes from 35 miles an hour to 17,000 miles an hour in the space of about 50 years, straight up like that. Then from 1960 forward, from 1960, it's a flat line.
Lines. Yep.
So that is coincidentally the same time that all the anti-gravity research after the T. Townsend Brown presentation to the Navy, same time. And all that stuff went black. So what seems to me that obviously happened is that we had this curve go straight up, there was a breakthrough, but that technology's never become public. Because there's just no way that a trend curve like that just goes flat for the next 70 years, 60 years. It's crazy. So I think that clearly these things that we're seeing on the space shuttle videos and the stories about the ARV, I think that stuff is probably all true, and we have developed these capabilities. And with those capabilities, we should be able to travel to Mars, in a couple of days. We should be able to maybe travel as far as Alpha Centauri there's one flight plan of about 5 months, which is extraordinary because you're talking about going 4 light years in 5 months.
Well, I mean, we have Elon Musk, and you would think, well, he is in that position, and so why is he screwing around with rockets?
Because that's all you're allowed to talk about publicly is rockets. I mean, that's what we're allowed to exploit publicly, but it just makes no sense that we've made no propulsion breakthroughs.
If this stuff is going on, then it would be going on at SpaceX, and we've been to SpaceX.
But there is this new thing, the EM drive, that the Chinese have been testing, and that NASA has tested, and they've all said we get thrust out of this. And basically what it is they call it a resonant cavity generator. It's just basically a closed-up microwave oven with an open end and a closed end. And all they do is charge it up with a little electricity and bounce microwaves inside of it. And again, it moves in the positively charged direction of the way the microwaves are bouncing there's nothing providing the thrust. There's no fuel. That violates the laws of thermodynamics, but these things
NASA
work.
ignored that invention for a really long time, and they finally just did some work on it just to pacify the guy, basically, and then found out
and
it
then
worked.
went, oh, whoops, it works? What the hell, it works?
But again, that's very rudimentary technology that pales in comparison to the kind of stuff that we're talking about.
Right, but they've got a 50 or 60 year head start on us because the Germans may have discovered this breakthrough technology, like we said, back in the 1940s or early 50s.
Alien intervention.
Or alien help, alien intervention. I mean, again, there's still, I think that...
I mean, I'm not married to that idea, so, it's like, it seems like you're saying that there's a possibility that all of this stuff is originated by human beings.
There is a distinct possibility that it's all human beings, but I do think there's no question there's aliens coming here, and there's aliens interacting with people, and I don't think all the abduction stories that we have out there. Travis Walton did not get zapped by Germans. Okay, I think that he had an encounter with extraterrestrial beings, and maybe they're helping us for their own reasons. I don't know. I'm not sure. I don't want to go into that question because you're
that's
speculating.
That's a whole other.
But I mean, you look at other stuff. You look at the Project Serpo website. Serpo's been out there since 2005, and you go through it, and just the volume of information is phenomenal. And there's this whole transcript that I reproduced some of it in the book of a briefing that was given to President Reagan in 1981 where they tell him about aliens. And it's amazing because the different characters that are in that, there's this mysterious guy called the caretaker, who is the caretaker of this information for presidents. And then there's William Casey, and there's some other aides, which one of them I'm convinced is Mike Deaver, and then there's Ronnie. And as you read the transcript, all of their personalities come out, and they're exactly like the real people. In other words, somebody went to the detail of Ron going, well, if there's evil tarantuloids out there, I should know about it, right? Brief me on that. So you go through this, and I'm like, wow, the level of detail of this, and the thousands and thousands of pages, is to me a very weighty factor that says that Serpo, what's on serpo.org, is probably very, very close to what actually happened, to something that actually did happen. And people say, oh, well, it's a hoax. Well, the whole purpose of a hoax, I think we talked about this the other day, the purpose of a hoax is to say to people, oh, wow, see how smart I am, see how clever I am, look at all these people I fooled. I fooled Stanton Friedman, and I fooled Ron James, and I fooled all these different people to believing this thing that I made up out of my butt. If you're going to do that, why would you wait 11 years and still not tell anybody that you were the guy that hoaxed it? Isn't the point of a hoax to prove to everybody else how smart you are?
Yeah.
I mean, if somebody made up Serpo, if they completely made it up and wrote these tens of thousands of words, I mean, we're talking about volumes and volumes and volumes of information, and put it out there. I would think the only reason I would do that would be to get myself a screenwriting job in Hollywood, yet that's never happened. Nobody's ever come out and said, oh, I made this all up. This is mine, I made it up, look at how clever I am, look at how I fooled you. So I don't think that either the MJ-12 documents or the Serpo stuff, I don't think that they're hoaxes. Somebody would have taken credit for them by now.
When does your book come out?
Oh, Hidden Agenda, NASA and the Secret Space Program is actually out right now. It's out in the fall of 2016, just came into the bookstores. So, in fact, I don't even have my copies of it yet, but brand new book, it just came out. And
so through the magic of technology at my disposal,
yes,
I'm going to magically make the book cover appear right there. So
right
you
there.
Can't do that on the radio, guys, remember that.
Yeah.
So anyway, I think that the work that you're doing, it's like after the Mars books, it's like, well, yeah, where's he going to go from there? And you have really, just in what you've told me, you've really done some amazing research, and it seems as though when people read this book, it's really going to open their eyes to this reality, because right now the secret space program is this ambiguous thing with just a lot of layers and a lot of stuff to peel away. And you know, congratulations on getting to the nuts and bolts of what's really possible, and then letting people at least have that as a base before they start assuming that everything they hear has complete or even fractional truth. So congratulations.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. And I mean, I guess the main message I would have is, look, I think we can establish pretty much for a fact that the technology exists to build our own space fleet that can go faster than light. I think there's no question about that. And that's what I want people to take away from this.